and we're getting ready to stream. And I will turn my camera off, but I will be here if needed.
That's great. Thank you so much, Brandy.
There you go. Have a good one.
All right, so I'll call this meeting of the Active Transportation and Sustainability Advisory Committee to order. I'd like to acknowledge that many of us are gathered on the territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, who are known as the Three Fires Confederacy. And much of this land is covered by the Williams Treaties of 1923. I think when we do this work around sustainability, we need to be mindful of the fact that Indigenous peoples on this land have been stewards of this land since time immemorial, and that colonialism has harmed Indigenous people and the land for centuries now, and we have a responsibility to mend that harm and work in partnership with Indigenous peoples. So welcome everybody. I see that we have a number of names I don't recognize, so thank you for being here. And I think we'll do a quick roundtable introduction just to refresh everyone on who we are. My name is Keenan Aylwin. I'm the Ward 2 Councillor for the City of Barrie and the Chair of the committee. And I will pass it along to Kelly to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Patterson-McGrath, and I am a member, happy member of the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee. And yeah, I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Kelly.
Pass it along. Yeah, I'll pass it along to Anne-Marie.
Perfect.
Thanks for the tag, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. Happy back to school. Hopefully it's a happy morning for all of you when we're wheeling or walking our way. So my full name, Anne-Marie Kungle. I am the Ward 3 City Councillor for Barrie and a member. And I'll tag John.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I'm John Northcote. I'm a resident of the City of Barrie and a committee member and a transportation engineer. And I will pass it on to Eric.
Hi, Eric Jacoby Hawkins, a long-time 20-year board member of Living Green Barrie and citizen member of this committee. We'll go to Brett.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brett Graytrix. I'm a staff representative for agenda items on this meeting today. I'm the Senior Project Manager of Transportation Planning, and I'll pass that over to Mr. Kevin Rankin.
Sorry, made me find my mute really fast. I'm Kevin Rankin, Manager of Parks and Forestry Operations. I'm just a staff representative, helping in with one of the agenda items at least. Thanks.
That's great, thanks. And Andy from Living Green.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Pellin, Executive Director of Living Green Barrie, and this will be my first meeting, so I'll look forward to sitting in and seeing what's going on.
That's great, thank you. Okay, I see Dave McLaughlin. If you want to quickly introduce yourself.
You're muted there, Dave, if you're trying.
There we go.
All right, sorry, took me a minute. Let me turn off my video, see if that works too. Hi, everyone, I'm Dave McLaughlin. I'm with WSP. I lead our National Active Transportation Planning and Design practice. I was also a contributor to the city's current transportation master plan and active transportation and trail master plans. And we're here today to do a presentation later in the agenda, and we're supporting Brett and the city team as they move forward and start rolling out bikeway projects over the next few years. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Justin Jones.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Justin Jones. I'm a community engagement specialist and active transportation planner with WSP Canada, formerly with the Share the Road Cycling Coalition for 8 years. So bring pretty good understanding of the landscape of active transportation across Ontario to this project. And I'm going to be leading the public consultation and engagement around this, as well as the development of the education and encouragement strategy for the City of Barrie. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Abram.
Hey guys, my name is Abram. I'm a transportation planner within WSP's Active Transportation Group, and working with Justin, Dave, and of course Brett on the Barrie Interim Cycling Network project with some technical support. So happy to be on here.
All right, that's great. Thanks, everyone. And we all saw Brandy at the beginning of our meeting. Brandy is our amazing clerk who organizes these meetings, and we're so thankful for the work that you do, Brandy.
You humble me. Thank you.
All right, here we go. Let's kick it off. So the first item is the update from the consultant team on the Cycle Barrie infrastructure program. So take it away. Looks like Dave unmuted there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just introduce the group. Again, I think we've got a flavor for the team, but I wanted to give the committee an update of where we're at, the core scope items, and next steps as we move through this process. We're still relatively in early stages of this project, but I thought it was pertinent to bring you folks up to speed and just lay out where we're going. So I will turn the floor over to Mr. McLaughlin.
Thanks, Brett. I'm going to share my screen, Brandy. Hopefully this will work fine. Can everyone let me know if they can see the screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yep.
All right, let me go in presentation mode here. All right, thank you. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an update presentation on our current assignment we're doing with the city. We're also going to give you a few highlights of the new Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, which is the new design guidelines for bikeway facilities, intersections, and trail connections, multi-use pathways in road right-of-ways that will be coming out. We thought it would be published in the spring, but it's been deferred until fall 2021 by MTO. It has been approved by MTO and will be coming very shortly. So a brief presentation or summary of what we're going to talk about today. We've already done some introductions, but I'd like to share with you a few others who are in our team, give you a summary of what we're doing on our current project with the City of Barrie, give you some highlights of some of the design solutions we're looking at, as well as what's in the new Book 18, talk about how we're applying those to a couple of sample projects as part of our initial phase of work, and then pass it over to Brett, and we'll talk about next steps. So our project team is, I'm the project manager. We're reporting directly to Brett. We have Sean Smith, who one of our leading engineers in facility design, previously with York Region. James Schofield, a project manager on a team and designer. Justin Jones, who you've met today, and a number of other colleagues, Ibram Braithwaite, Rafi Bedrosian, who's a very senior civil engineer in terms of road design, and a number of other supporters who aren't with us today, and a technical support team. So this slide sort of captures, and by the way, if there's a question, you feel free to intervene, but we can also do it at the end of the presentation, which I think is the plan. Our assignment is broken into these 5 parts. Part A is looking at an interim network development, which is basically implementing sections of the approved AT plan from the TMP that can be implemented through not reconstruction, but through pavement markings and signage, perhaps road diets. Sorry, keep on moving my cursor here. Part B is looking at a number of gaps that were identified in the network and developing sort of a functional design to understand how those might be remedied and what that might cost for future consideration. And the last part is there are a number of key corridors, 2 in particular, that we thought we'd be looking at, where there's intensification planned over the next number of years. And the idea is, well, what would those 2 corridors look like to better improve active transportation? There's a public consultation strategy, which is intended to inform the public and stakeholders about the process and to engage them, especially in parts B and C. And then part E is an important part. It is the development of an education and outreach program development strategy. So I'm just going to share, see if I can do this here, share my screen with a couple of other slides. So bear with me. Can you all see this? Yes?
Yes.
This is a copy of the network plan for active transportation in the City of Barrie that was approved in the current TMP. Just sort of give you a few highlights. It's a very comprehensive master plan that includes new development areas, includes a big focus on separation where feasible, especially on new roads, and then retrofitting other existing roads as best as possible within the space allowed. And if there are opportunities to, through rehab or reconstruction, to elevate the facility types on those roads. So this is just a bit of a highlight. Many of you have probably already seen this, but I just wanted to share this with you first. The second step is our stage 1 assignment. So what we've done is we've gone through and in consultation with city staff, they've identified all of these corridors you see in yellow. And there are photographs as well associated with them from our field work that are locations where through retrofits, i.e. Adjusting pavement markings or adding pavement markings, perhaps putting in restrictions for parking on one side of the road. There may be a road diet as well on some of these roads, and through additional signage. So not really reconstruction. These are all considered operational improvements that don't require any kind of class environmental assessment. And we're working through these. I believe there's about 20 kilometers of them that we're working through. And this is the first component. We'll be completing this in the fall 2021. And we'll be sharing information on what these roads might look like with some of the design solutions that we're proposing later in the fall. The next phase of development is network gaps. So there are a number of network gaps here highlighted in the red zones you see on this map that staff from the city had identified, and we've gone in and taken an initial look. We haven't dug deep into this yet. We'll be consulting with this committee and with the public. And we'll be applying the Interior Traffic Manual Book 18 design approach to investigate and explore what kind of improvements could be accommodated and how they might be accommodated in the future on these corridors through retrofits or other changes. Ideally, if they're planned as part of public works projects, but if not, then what would those entail, and when should they be sort of prioritized and scheduled? So there's a number of those, fewer than the interim, the phase 1, but same kind of detail. We're taking these to a sort of a functional design level. And you can see we put some initial thoughts down when we started this project about options, but each one of these will be revisited as we get into this in a little bit deeper. And the last part is 2 corridors where intensification is being considered. And that includes Yonge Street, Burton, from Essa to Mapleview. So let me just, So Yonge Street from Mapleview all the way across to Essa, and then also Essa from Ferndale Drive to connect to the waterfront trail at the waterfront. So those are 2 projects that are sort of a future phase of our work that we'll be undertaking. We probably won't be starting that until late fall 2021, and that'll be going into the spring as well. I think we can talk about consultation at a later date as we're still working on putting together a strategy. We will be having a consultation event in the fall, and Brett will be in touch with this committee about the details about that when we get to that. We'd like to have some work done in draft in advance so that we can present to those who are interested sort of some of the changes that are being considered by staff, and to give the public an opportunity to actually respond to some of the work that's been done, rather than to introduce them at the beginning of the study and not really have anything to share with them. So that's our strategy. And then the outreach and education outreach component will be coming back again at a later date to speak about that and to get input from this committee and others. And Justin Jones on our team today will be spearheading that assignment. We've done that for other municipalities. I think the difference here is we want to really come up with a nice formal strategy, cost it for city staff, and prioritize steps so that they can then work out a strategy on how to roll it out in the coming years. And it's really important as you invest in active transportation and infrastructure that you also invest in education and outreach, not just for those who are going to bike or walk, but also for all road users, so they all understand the changes that are occurring in their municipality. I am now going to take you through a few slides that will talk about the new OTM Book 18. So our Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, the one on the left in the green, was published in 2013. My team and I and former team members developed this on behalf of Ministry of Transportation of Ontario. It was Ontario's first design guideline for cycling facilities in the province of Ontario, and they are guidelines, they're not standards. Since that time, of course, a lot has changed in cycling. There's a much more of a movement towards improving how we design intersections, and especially on separation, both through the use of pavement markings and physical delineators and multi-use pathways, protected intersections. So the graphic on the right is sort of showing you sort of the evolution of where we are going now compared to where we were in the past. And I'll provide a few details. For example, conventional bike lanes are still considered an appropriate facility type, but only on lower volume, lower speed roads, and not for multi-lane roads, i.e. roads that have more than 3 lanes. So if you have one lane in each direction and 2-way center left turn lane, if the speed and volume threshold makes sense, then bike lanes could be an option on that road. Obviously, the preference is always to provide greater separation where feasible, and that starts with a buffer. And for some roads, that buffer as the road becomes rehabbed or resurfaced in the future, could actually have a physical delineator in it, whether they be precast curbs or a formal curb or a low wall or different types of treatments that cities across Ontario are considering. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the changes that are happening in Ontario, and all of these changes are being considered as part of the assignment we're currently doing for the City of Barrie. One of the big changes in the new traffic manual are these Gnomographs. These graphs were designed as part of a 3-step process to help municipalities make decisions on selecting routes when they develop a network plan, and then selecting facility types. So these have evolved quite a bit, and the thresholds have become lower for separation. So this is the urban facility Pneumograph, and you can see up here when you get slightly above approaching 60 kilometers an hour on a road, and with a 24-hour traffic volume, starting to exceed 6,000, you're really starting to look for some form of a physically separated bikeway. And for some, that might be, a separated bike lane with precast curbs or permanent curbs cast in place. It could be a cycle track, which could be slightly elevated from the road surface or at the same level as a sidewalk, or it could be a multi-use path, which would be in place of a sidewalk, or if you have space adjacent to, and that could take the form of a 2-way cycle track or a multi-use path. A lot of upper tier municipalities on their major arterial roads are moving towards multi-use paths and or cycle tracks when they rehab their roads. And others, when they're doing retrofits, are trying their best to narrow their travel lane widths from the conventional width that traffic engineers have used for many years, that are now more in line with the 2017 approved TAC, Transportation Association of Canada, roadway design guidelines that many municipalities across the country use, including in Ontario, that have lowered the lane widths now, especially in urban areas, so that the lane better matches sort of the posted speed. So we don't design our streets and our lanes wider than the speed that we intend people to use them for, which is, it would seem logical, intuitive, but for whatever reason, for decades, we have over-designed many of our streets and laneways. So this is a refreshing look, and it's something now that municipalities, now that it's been formalized, are starting to adopt. There's also a rural Pneumograph for rural roads, and these are roads where there are no curbs. They tend to be in the suburban or rural areas of municipalities, and it really provides guidance on the kind of facility types you might want to consider. Shared operating space is when you have good sight lines and not a lot of traffic, and speed may be high, but the traffic may be low, and having having a bike sharing a lane is considered acceptable. But the threshold for adding a paved shoulder or a buffer paved shoulder has been significantly reduced in rural areas now, especially for formal AT networks that are identified and council approved. And so this Pneumograph provides that guidance. And there are more details in the new OTM Book 18 to provide municipal staff guidance on how they can apply these. And again, these are guidelines. They're not standards. And that's done by design because there needs to be flexibility as municipalities start implementing these new guidelines, and they can't always get what they would the preferred facility type would be until such time as they schedule or find the budget to improve some of their roadways. Sometimes they don't have the property in deep urban areas or center areas of cities and towns and villages. They don't have the property or the road right of way to actually build everything they would like, so they have to make some decisions on ultimate cross sections. And again, OTM Book 18 provides that guidance. So I want to just throw you through a few design details from the new Book 18. One of the changes is a significant increase in the use of pavement markings and color to identify different types of facilities, both along roads, between intersections, and in intersections too, which is a change from previous years where very often, except for sort of the left turn guideline for motor vehicles, you didn't really have any markings in the intersection, but now that's changing. So here, this is just showing a few examples of different treatments for bus stops that could be considered. And that's another thing, OTM Book 18 does provide examples that municipalities can consider. This is for driveways. Again, there are different treatment types for driveways depending on whether it's a single family residential or not. OTM Book 18 provides a number of examples. Here are two of them. Another example is to actually have the buffer continue right across the driveway, especially because where you have low volume. And that's consistent with the old practice of bike lanes, where when you implemented a bike lane, the white line was consistent and solid right across all the driveways. This just provides a little detail on the pavement markings. It could be 100 to 200 mils. I think the plan right now in Barrie is to start off as in piloting the 100 mil on both sides. And that's something that could evolve over time. So I only have a few more minutes. I just wanted to walk you through a few examples. So here, we picked a few of the corridors in the phase 1 assignment, where we're doing retrofits through pavement markings and signage. And here's a section of Johnson Street where we've applied that design guidance, where instead of bike lanes, we're actually implementing or proposing buffered bike lanes along the corridor and some parking restrictions in order to allow that facility type. And we're extending the buffer across all the residential driveways, just to provide and reinforce to people entering and exiting driveways that they're entering into a zone and they have to be extra cautious. And for those of you who may not know, under the Highway Traffic Act in Ontario, anyone, whether you're walking, cycling, or driving, when you enter and turn into or turn out of a corridor, you're legally obligated to yield to through traffic. And the through traffic could be a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a car or truck. So this type of approach reinforces that. Here's another example with a bus stop along Johnson. And the decision for the time being is it will be marked solid green. There'll be a hatch line or dash line here. And that's meant to convey to cyclists as they approach those zones that they understand or should understand that buses are entering that zone. They have the right to enter that zone because the bus needs to come up to the curb to load and unload. And so making it stand out both in the field and when they're actually using it through signage is really important to avoid any kind of risk. So the intention will be the bus will traveling down the travel lane, and when there's a gap to do so, there's no cyclist in that lane, they'll move into the curb. If while they're loading or unloading, a cyclist comes upon them, the hope is the cyclist will yield and wait until the bus moves rather than jumping out into the travel lane. They can do that legally, but that's not the goal. Another section of Johnson Street, just ending at Cheltenham, is an example of this first pilot piece that we're doing. And the goal here is to keep the bike lane a consistent width. So as you all know, I think your roads vary in width from curb to curb. So what will change here is the buffer. So our intention is to vary the width of the buffer, but to keep the bike facility ideally in the 1.8 to 2 meter width, which provides some extra space. The advantage of the buffer too is it keeps motor vehicles a little further away from cyclists traveling on these streets, including larger trucks where they have mirrors that are hanging over. It provides that a bit more separation. From a maintenance perspective, it's not any different than today, in that you're clearing it with especially snow clearing. However, in the future, should physical protection start to be added, and we'll be talking about that later in the study, to start to pick 1 or 2 pilot streets to actually do that in Barrie, then the operational component will need to be revisited. And most municipalities sort of repurpose their sidewalk plows, and they'll use the sidewalk plows to clear their physically separated bike lanes, and they're designed to allow that. And that's it for the presentation. So Brett, can I pass it over to you maybe? I'll keep sharing my screen for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Dave. That's great. So just wanted to outline next steps, and these are tentative dates. Right now, Dave and his team, they're working on producing 20 kilometers of pavement marking plans. The actual network is more than 20 kilometers. I can't recall the exact figure, but it's that's where that 20 kilometer figure is that's the scope of this phase of the project, or implementation of the phase 1 works. We're working on content for the project website, and we're also hoping to do again, a public information center this fall as well, tentatively. And then also Dave's working on phase 2 and 3, starting this fall, and then wrapping up the project with the development of the outreach and education program, likely in Q1, Q2 of next year. And that'll tie in nicely to hopefully completing this project by about Q3, Q4-ish next year in 2022. But I just thought at this time I'd just open the floor to any questions. I'm sure you folks have some, so I'll try my best to stick handle them, and Dave will come in and correct me when I misspeak. So yeah, anyone? I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
I see Anne Marie's hand. Go ahead, Anne Marie. And then Kelly.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions, Brett, so I'll direct them to you and let you then defer to whomever you think is most appropriate.
Sure.
And nice to meet you, Dave and team, and excited about these bike lanes coming on board. So as a Ward 3 councillor, I'll put that specific hat on, and as Brett and I have had conversations, and if a benefit to the collective, Dave, I'm not sure if you've got that presentation still handy, but if we could pull up the image of the map, I think with the routes, it kind of does a nice job of showing that Hamner and Livingston have come on with road diets. Hamner is planned for the coming year. And so as an area that's where residents have been more recently introduced to kind of road changes and the adoption of lanes for cycling,
Okay.
Probably on the map, I'll let you go to the map area. Is that handy?
Yeah, bring it up. Let me get out of this one, and I'll bring up my other one.
Okay. And I guess so knowing that you've got the project scope and other considerations, is there anywhere in the process where additions could be considered or opportunities might be highlighted, or are those opportunities kind of closed or could be caught in recommendations for a future scope? And the main piece is, selfishly, I'm looking at, when we look at Livingston and Hamner in the north side, we've got kind of our north to south arteries to the downtown core, or either Bayfield, St. Vincent, or Duckworth. So Duckworth takes us quite a bit east, in my opinion, but does align nicely to Johnson in that focus. Bayfield, and is an area that we've got major development planned for, is a corridor for intensification. However, if we look at St. Vincent, I can't help but consider St. Vincent as an opportunity to look at bike lanes, because it does a nice job of connecting Hamner in the top, Hamner Street East at the very, very top, which is getting a road diet this coming year, 2022. Livingston, coming from Bayfield East, received a road diet recently. But for me, when we think about active transportation from the downtown up St. Vincent into the northeast end, I can't help but still look at the bridge over the 400 as being an area of.
Oh, you're muted, Anne-Marie. For some reason, you went on mute there. Said you can't help notice that the bridge
Is, you know, an area where there's lots of, you know, is not necessarily one that promotes safety with your biking or walking, because you tend to be pushed onto the sidewalk and there's some blind spots and we see some traffic situations there, in my opinion. So I'm wondering about, is there a place to look at the potential to create some safe infrastructure to promote cycling, walking over that bridgeway that is a nice direct route into the downtown core, rather than having to take your bike through the bike lanes that map over to Duckworth and then back west on Grove into the downtown. So I'll leave it there, but I'm hoping to see, I know that's not in the plan, but I would like to know if that could be considered and where that could be found in the process of the project scope.
So as part of the first public information center, as well as the follow-up public information center, we'll have opportunities for folks and councillors as well in the committee to provide input. What we'll want to do is take that back, just have a look at it and see whether it makes sense to entertain increasing the scope of this project, or if it's more appropriate to look at that as part of a separate effort. Typically, when we involve a large structure such as the Highway 400 crossing on St. Vincent, we'd want to package that with a bit of a bridge assessment to see what the structure is capable of, what is the current status of the lifespan of that structure, to make sure we're not doing anything not in alignment with life cycle needs of that structure. So that would be one consideration with that specific example. But yeah, absolutely, there's opportunity for input for additional routes for either, again, consideration of scope increase, or likely preferred for a follow-on effort to do that as kind of a phase 2 of this project. But we're hoping with this overall effort that this is a continuous program moving forward to build out this phase 1 network over the next 5 or so years, depending on budget allocations through the capital planning process. So yes, there's definitely opportunity.
That's great. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, even if it's because we've got the double lane on St. Vincent, as you're well aware, but for me, even if it's a one-off around looking at that bridge section would be great. So I'll look to you to let me know how I should respond if there's documentation coming through the process, but if it's not included in a recommendation, if you could tap me if there's something I need to raise as a process to have it looked at.
Great. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Okay, I have Kelly next and then John. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really great, very exciting to see where things are heading in Barrie. I like the new 2021 planning as well, regarding being very more conscious about separating lanes and having protected lanes. So that's really great to hear and see. My question is around data and around decision making. So that 20 kilometers, can you share with us, I'm not sure if this is Dave or Brett, the need, number one, the need, but also the usage studies surrounding the decision to choose that particular 20 kilometers?
No, yeah, great question. So the rationale really is we're following the recommendations contained within the Transportation Master Plan. And because we're focused on a line painting strategy, we're really just trying to build out the network to the greatest extent possible and providing connectivity to as much of the city as possible, addressing major barriers such as Highway 400, impacts from Kempenfelt Bay. Where we really get into more data-driven approaches because of cost impacts is the larger retrofit or capital projects, which can easily be hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars versus painting projects. So right now our focus is really, let's build out this phase 1 network. It's relatively low cost. We know it's needed. These are residential areas, and this will be the stepping stone to justify moving to the next step with the increased investment, but also the increased scrutiny on where we allocate those dollars to those specific capital projects.
One follow-up, if I could, Chair. Do we have the data, Brett, for our transportation usage in the city, whether it's walking, cycling? Do we have a baseline?
As far as just global, like modal splits?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now I believe our cycling mode share is around 1%. And I can't just recall the active trend, the pedestrian side. I think it's around 5 or 6%, but I just don't have those numbers offhand, but I can report back with the accurate numbers after the meeting to the committee members. But I know for sure the cycling is at 1% based off the 2016 Transportation Tomorrow survey.
2016 that was done, right? So almost 8 years ago. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so that process the MTO is in control of, and they're looking at updating that, and we're a contributing member. With COVID though, they've been delayed because they don't want the data to be grossly skewed by, again, COVID impacts. So they are working the best they can to provide that information on updates.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Brett. John, go ahead.
Thanks, Keenan. Yeah, I guess just start off that I'm really excited about the team from WSP. Looks like a great team, and thanks for doing the presentation. I think I'm looking forward to the stuff that you guys can do. Looks like with the great team that you guys can put together. So the other part I was really excited to see was the reduced lane widths. I think that's great. Barrie's got some huge roads that are just unnecessarily allocated to automobile traffic. I think that's great that we can move that over. I've got kind of 3 questions, and I think they're pretty short questions, so I hope I can do those 3 questions. So for the easy wins ones, are we thinking just roughly, are those pilot projects, or are they are they intended to be permanent? Or if they are pilot projects, what percentage are you expecting are to be pilots versus what's going to stay in for the long term? Or do you know that yet?
So when we were referring to the pilot aspect, we're looking at 1 or 2 routes where we might pilot physical separation, but there's work to be done with internal city staff as far as winter maintenance. That's the largest concern we have, is how we realistically deal with that. And the challenge really is, and it's not insurmountable, it's a bit of a learning process, but the challenge is if we introduce a raised curb separating in the buffer space, we'll have the snowplow trucks push that windrow into that space. And then how do we physically deal with that? Because typically you'll have a curb and sidewalk. So can a sidewalk machine produce the power necessary to drive that large windrow up onto the boulevard? Or do we have to look at an alternative approach to winter maintenance? Definitely it's not insurmountable. There's other places that do it, but that's one thing we'll be looking and researching as part of this project. As far as the remainder of the network, the intent is it's permanent in the near term, but again, the standards of cycling is a constant evolution, and as we look at reconstructing some of these roads, and if they're teetering towards our larger roads, again, we look at to see if we could apply best practice, if we can move to the next level of cycling infrastructure, and that's most easily done on our larger arterials where those roads are subject to a Class CA process anyways, if we're doing a road widening. But typically, as we go through major reconstructions, we do look at opportunities to improve active transportation for both pedestrians and cyclists. But as Dave mentioned in his presentations, there are constraints with property, and that's typically the #1 constraint. But we also get into impacts with residents' driveways, if the infrastructure may impact the number of cars that could be parked there. Landscaping impacts, so we have to be mindful of that as well. But so short answer, it is intended to be permanent, but as we fully reconstruct these roads, we do look at opportunities for improvements where required and technically appropriate to escalate that infrastructure.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's great to hear that we're kind of stepping it up. I like that idea rather than kind of just testing it out and maybe pulling it back later. So that's great. The one other question I had about with lane width reductions, wasn't sure if is there going to be a review on corner radius as well. Sometimes in my experience, we've got some big corner radius at certain intersections that increase the speed of traffic around corners. Is that another part that's going to be included in this?
It won't be included in this. What we're looking at though is developing more contextually appropriate standards for our roads. Right now, I categorize them as more of a suburban design, and we're really missing that urban piece. So again, more appropriate narrow widths, improve streetscaping or contextually appropriate streetscaping, depending on where they are within the urban growth center or on an intensification corridor. But just providing more contextually specific design guidance, because again, you're familiar with our standards. Our cross sections are they're really suburban roadway designs. So they're a good starting point, but I think we definitely benefit from that more urban context, especially as we redevelop within the UGC.
Right. Yeah. In certain areas, I think, yeah, not necessarily applicable everywhere, industrial areas for sure, but there might be.
Exactly. We have to be contextually appropriate. Like if we're on a major 5-lane arterial and there is truck traffic, we do have to balance that need with also the need for slowing traffic. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just think that with the everyone's concerned about traffic calming and the narrowed widths, I think works well into that. I think the corner radius can also be a part in that one too. But and then the last question is about on-street parking. Obviously, is a major concern from residents as we go through this stuff, and it's often a barrier. Is there anything in this that's going to help us with providing an approach or tools that we can use to maybe give to council or to staff to say, you know, removing on-street parking is appropriate or we think it's appropriate kind of within a range of if there is this amount of on-street parking or if there's availability somewhere else. I'm just wondering if there's a possibility to provide tools to council as part of this that they can say, you know, we've looked at it, on-street parking is a thing, you know, is a concern, but at some points there's a greater good that needs to be considered along some of these corridors where removing a few on-street parking spaces inhibits a lot of potential active transportation movement. So I wasn't sure if that was part of it, but it would be great if we can give council something like that where they can suggest to the public, you know, we've looked at this, we've got this chart that we look at to say, you know, when is it appropriate to remove on-street parking? And in this case it is, or this case it isn't.
We'll be detailing that in our staff report to council as well as the report from WSP on this project. But generally we're following an approach where we're locating the cycling infrastructure on contextually appropriate routes. So where possible, we're trying to push it to our collector roads where it makes sense and where it makes sense to also restrict parking. When we're on local roads, we're tending to use a shared or a mixed use signage. So it's not dedicated cycling infrastructure, but it's still technically appropriate because it's lower speed, lower volume. And those are locations where we wouldn't look to prohibit parking. So we're trying to strike that balance of where we are routing through local roads on residential that we're not taking away parking, but on our collector roads or arterials, it is appropriate to look at removing parking. And if we're going to a dedicated facility, there is a need, you have to remove the parking.
Okay, great. Thanks, Keenan. Thanks, Brett.
John, any other questions from members of the committee? Anne-Marie?
One last one, and I was wondering, Brett, if you could help me tie this into the process. So, you know, knowing that I'm a newer counselor and this is the first OP official plan process I'm going through, I'm thinking about the timing you mentioned about the MTO's documentation coming out this fall, and then so I'm assuming that there is well enough time for any provincial policy to be well adopted into policies that will guide our future urban design guidelines that tie into the OP. Is there any, I guess I'll reframe it as, how does the MTO's policy get adopted into our planning and development processes?
Well, thanks for the question. So the OP is an overarching strategy document that really just supports what's been developed through our current transportation master plan. Is very supportive of active transportation infrastructure. Where we will see the new OTM Book 18 adopted is in the planned transportation master plan update, which is scheduled to commence next year. And that's going to be a multi-year project looking at a variety of issues, but that'll be the core kind of document that sets the new benchmark for cycling infrastructure. But as Dave said, again, the OTM, that's a guideline. We want to achieve it, but there's many instances where we would be limited just because of constraints, but that sets the benchmark that we're aiming for. And typically, if we're looking at an arterial road, a widening or a major retrofit for cycling infrastructure, we would be looking at some sort of environmental assessment that runs through an alternative assessment of alternatives, so we can examine impacts of moving to that higher standard and determining what those are, but then also benchmarking that against potentially a mitigating or a constrained solution to also provide cycling infrastructure, but it might not be that highest level cycling facility. So that's the process that would go. And then once we have the new transportation master plan updated with that, repeating myself here, is when we, again, depending on the project and the corridor, look to implement that and assess that through individual environmental assessments for capital road projects.
Great. And then follow up, trying to map a couple of our different strategies together. So as you work through that process with then adopting what's possible within the constraints of our city structure and opportunity with the MTO guidelines, would you be bringing that back to this committee to identify how that's been incorporated into our updated master plan next year? Is there a communication back about how we've actually, what we were able to include and what we're not able to include? And I'm wondering about the timing of that. If we look to apply for pedestrian friendly city or bike friendly city, if we can show our intention around our formal documentation about how we're moving to adopt these standards into our planning.
So the transportation master plan itself, there's a large planning component to that. That will take approximately 3 years to complete. So it won't be ready for next year, just for clarification. As far as just clarify, what was the other question you had?
Yeah, we've looked back through this committee around the last couple of submissions we've made to be like a cycle friendly, bike friendly city, and wondering about if there's good timing for our next application, if there is a process underway by which we are actively looking at reviewing the MTO's standards and looking at what we can adopt or how we can move the city forward towards some of those standards of practice. So I was wondering about strategically, is there a good time for us to reapply for that based on the work that you're doing and those guidelines that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I think the city would be in a better position if the intake was opened next spring, ideally perhaps in the fall, but I believe it opens in the spring. I'm not entirely sure. We'll have a good handle on the routes that we'll be committed to implementing. And we'll also have if we don't have it completed, we'll have a solid draft of the education outreach program by that time as well to bring into our application, as well as we can speak to our transportation master plan update and the elements it will include, such as the new OTM Book 18 review. So definitely next year will be a better year, especially from the education outreach point. And also that'll be the year that we're starting to look at a revised traffic calming policy and a Vision Zero policy as well. Once really, we will be starting that, but we are following Ontario Traffic Council's efforts. So just depending on when they finish, and they were looking to wrap up about June 22 was their last estimate, but things tend to slip a little. So
that's fantastic. And I just want to say thank you, because I think you touched on two other pieces that we've talked about, but I'm not sure we give you great credit for, because sometimes it's the curse of only what you know, and you bring a lot of great information to the table. And around the revised traffic calming piece and the Vision Zero, there's a lot of really great work happening. So I guess I'll go on a limb here, Keenan as chair, to kind of say, is it beneficial to kind of put a standing item for staff to be able to give updates as they need, rather than wait for us to kind of ask the right question? But I guess I wanted just to look at giving you liberties, Brett, to kind of be identifying some of the stuff and where it's opportune for us to be aware of it and to support you in that work, but also to be looking strategically at how do we apply and when should we be applying for that pedestrian friendly city application. But there's a lot of work going on that I think you and the team should get a lot of credit for.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think We've been getting some great updates from Brett, like Brett's great at requesting a spot on the agenda when there's an update to give. So I really appreciate that proactive approach too, and being open with the committee. It's very, very helpful. I do have a question. So in 2019, there was a study published from the US of 12 major cities, and it was a 13-year study of separated bike lanes, actually all cycling facilities, I think. And it found that there were major increases in road safety for all road users for separated bike lanes, but no increase in safety with painted bike lanes, and actually decreased safety with sharrows, a shared lane. So I'm wondering if we have any thoughts on that. And to be clear, are we still implementing sharrows at all in the city of Barrie? I guess that's my first question.
So there was a period of time where the applications likely good intentions, but maybe weren't the most appropriate for the corridor. I was thinking like Big Bay Point might be one where that might not be the best, but we're looking to address that through the gap that we've identified in this project and look at upgrading that facility. As far as sharrows, in that context, no, we're not looking to do that, but assigned route is still an important part of this project, where we're looking to route traffic on local streets as a component, as a type of infrastructure, one of many for the city cycling network. So there'll still be sections where we're using assigned routes for cycling. But again, that would be limited to local roads following OTM Book 18 regulations. So we wouldn't see the application as we've seen on that. Now, to give you an example where they could be implemented and be appropriate, for example, on Dunlop Street in the downtown, that was part of the original EA recommendations. It's a very low speed road. I think it's ranges between 20 and 30 kilometers per hour actual travel speed. So that's a contextually appropriate example where we might want to do that. But on the flip side, is it that necessary to introduce that operation and maintenance cost? So that's always the kind of the decision-making process we go through. But as far as your other questions, I think I'll let Dave weigh in. I think he'd probably have some good experience from his OTM and OTC work.
Yeah, so Keenan, the research you talk about actually was quite an important piece of work. The challenges were that the sample size as it related to the sharrow components and the bike lane components were a little weak in the analysis, and that was a criticism, not a criticism, just a comment that a number of professionals and academics across North America made. But regardless, it was a very seminal piece of work. The update to Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 and even the 2017 update to the TAC Geometric Design Guide took into account that study and a number of others. And that's why the thresholds for separation have been lowered so that they would come online sooner, for example. Bike lanes are still being implemented because it provides a designated space for cyclists on lower volume, lower speed roads, and it provides better organization. There are other papers and studies that have indicated that there is benefit from doing that, but it is not an all ages and abilities facility. That's the reality. And it isn't necessarily going to generate more people to use that facility. Only a certain percentage of the population are comfortable riding, in a bike lane, separated from motor vehicle traffic by 100 mils of paint. And we know that, and that's why the new OTM Book 18, which my team and I led, is quite clear on making those changes. And I think I sort of mentioned it earlier, but just to repeat, many municipalities were and Barrie, one of them, were implementing conventional bike lanes on multi-lane roads, 4 and 5 lane roads. That's done. So the new guidelines do not recommend that. It's acknowledged that bike lanes don't really add a significant advantage, nor will they grow cycling activity, nor does it significantly increase safety, but it does provide better organization. And one of the challenges with bike facilities has always been intersections. So the transitions at intersections by facility types is important. There are benefits to having designated facilities and even just a bike lane on an approach to an intersection and carry it through the intersection now. But the new markings and strategy in the new OTM Book 18 because it provides better guidance, not just to cyclists, but especially to motorists and pedestrians on where one would anticipate everyone would be as they navigate through an intersection. And that is considered a benefit from a risk profile perspective in terms of reducing risk for all road users. But you're right, it's not an all accessibility facility. It has limited advantage. Share rails are still being used where there are those transitions or where there are existing constraints until such time a road can be rehabbed or resurfaced to have a more appropriate facility type put in. So you may still see a few share rails here and there, not as a facility type, but to more importantly show a transition point until such time it can be corrected, because we don't want to just end a facility and leave cyclists out in no man's land and not, convey to motorists too that cyclists are still moving through. Just because the bike lane ended doesn't mean the cyclists just disappeared. It means that the infrastructure, isn't there yet, but they're still there. So how do we convey that to motorists? So share rails can still do that for the transition. So it's just not for the cyclists. It's also for other road users as well.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that answer, Dave. And part of your answer just reminded me of another question I had that popped up during the presentation around the buffered bike lanes, the painted lanes, and the 100 millimeters. So the maximum in the OTM standards is 200 millimeters. Is that correct?
On the vehicle side.
Okay. So sorry, explain that on the vehicle side.
So the inside lane, so if a buffer has two parallel lanes, sometimes it has hatching in the middle, depending on whether it's wide enough to do that. Because if the buffer can only be, 300, 400, 500 millimeters, when you next come to repaint it, you get blobs because your contractors can't do it properly. So the hatching is, typically above 500 mils in a buffer. So the inside lane, the lane adjacent to the cyclist, is usually 100 mils, a standard conventional white lane. The lane adjacent to the motor vehicle can be either 100 mils or can be 200 mils, which is double the width. So cities like Ottawa and Toronto, a number of others, are slowly moving towards the 200 mils on their higher volume streets. It just provides a better and stronger indicator to motorists to stay away from that space. And it also allows the paint, to be honest with you, it lasts longer. It's a little thicker, paint wears off over time. 100 mils can disappear pretty fast over time. So that's another reason why they're doing that. I think in Barrie, especially with the interim phase, a lot of those are on collector roads, tend to be mostly 2-lane roads. A few of them are wider. And I think city staff decided initially, for ease of their contractor, is to go with 100 mil lanes, both inside and outside first. And then, over time, they may select to upgrade that to the 200 mil. It's an option. You can do either in the OTM Book 18 2021. But that's a discussion item for Brett to have with you all. So Brett, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Yeah, that was the rationale. It's just we're looking to, again, manage costs on such a large implementation program. So one of the ways to do that is maximize production of the contractor. Their standard line width is 100 millimeters. So the actual buffer won't change. It's just that line thickness. So using that, just saving 50% of the costs on that, but we're still doing the cross hatching, which is quite prominent and is quite a large upgrade from what we currently have, which is just 100 mil lines. And I believe the angled crosshatch, Dave, did you say was it 4 or 5? I can't recall. It was 500 mil. It's quite an upgrade to what we typically do today. So
it depends on the width. It could be 200 to 400.
That was where we landed as kind of a balanced approach to that item.
Thanks for that explanation. Okay, any other questions, comments from committee members on this piece? Not see. Oh, Anne-Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, me again. Sorry about that. So as we're using different language and talking a bit about different infrastructure, painting colors and whatnot, and you've got that education plan. I know sometimes I rage about seeing a car parked in a bike lane, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong about this because maybe it's just a multi-use shared use road, but not one to which I think the public or some of us understand about those transitions about the formal bike lanes to know what I'm hearing to be kind of a shared road, but nothing that, would have a bylaw infraction if you're parking on the side of the road. Am I understanding that right? That depending on the roads, if they're not collector roads, that although we've got painted bicycle route lanes, that they are informal from a parking standpoint?
So not exactly. So the mixed or the signed routes, they'll typically only be on local roads, and they'll be signed. One of the elements of this program is really taking the city signage to a next level for wayfinding and really identifying if you're on a cycling route. So if you're on a signed route, you will literally see signage on the boulevard. There'll be no parking restrictions. There'll be no pavement markings, I believe, Dave, on those routes itself. But as we move from those locals to our collectors, where we have designated facilities such as a bike lane, a buffered bike lane, and potentially an urban shoulder, we would need parking restrictions in place. So there'll be no parking signs clearly delineating parking restrictions. We did that large group of projects, I believe, in 2019. One example would be Mapleton, where urban shoulders are put in place, but parking has not been restricted, just as kind of a phase and opportunity for those residents. That's one street we're looking at actually upgrading that facility to a designated bicycling lane or buffer if it can be fit, and then restricting parking. So that would be an example where you might see that white edge line and see vehicles parked where it's currently permitted, but that's something where we might be looking to upgrade that facility and prohibit that.
Yeah, just to add,
Thank you for clarifying.
Brett is correct. The urban shoulder is a facility, but it's like a signed bike route. It's just a shoulder. Many municipalities, have overbuilt their local roads, and they're trying to narrow the. First of all, they're trying to move motor vehicle traffic further away from the cyclists who are using those roads, and they do that by adding shoulders and encouraging motor vehicles to drive a little more closely to the center of the road. But it does seem odd because you'll see a green bike route sign and you'll see motorists parked over that shoulder line, but they're allowed to do that. Ideally, if the road's wide enough, you would push the shoulder line out to about 2 meters. So actually the car can fit between the line and the curb, or 2.2, but not much wider than that. But Brett's right, it's not an infraction. And many municipalities at one time, a little bit less now, were rolling that out as a way of, building out a bike network without fighting Keenan, the whole issue, or John, the parking issue, right? Which is a big issue. But once people start seeing cyclists using their facilities, Halton Hills and Oakville and Milton, they've all come back because people who live on those streets are saying, well, how come cars are parking the bike lane? Maybe we should make it a bike lane and restrict parking. Well, that's the next evolution of what happens then, right? So then you put the stencil down of the bike symbol with the diamond, which means it's designated for cycling, and you pass a bylaw that then would restrict parking except for emergency services and city vehicles during maintenance. And it's sort of an evolution. So it's one way to go. Unfortunately, sometimes Richmond Hill experienced this where they put it down and it was left as an urban shoulder for 12 years. Council just decided they dealt with it, and they didn't really want to go back and fight the battle with those few residents along the corridor who occasionally thought that they needed to park on the road, even though the parking demand for that road was even less than it was before. And the reason being, when you put that lane line down and you have visitors, they look at the road and think, well, I'm not supposed to park here. So they park on the side street and then walk to the house. So it actually reduces parking demand. So it supports that evolution approach without, dealing with the political firestorm. But more and more municipalities are first taking a stab at reducing parking on one side to see if they can put in a bike facility on both sides. And if that doesn't work, then they'll go forward and try to reduce or restrict parking on both sides.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah,
That's great. Thank you so much. I say bring on the political firestorm, but maybe that's just me. Thanks so much for the presentation and for your work. We really, really appreciate it. I know we spent a lot of time on this, but this is our bread and butter, and it's really critical to the city. So thank you so much to your team. Thanks, Brett. And we will move on to the next item. And obviously the project team does not have to stay on the call unless you're just curious what happens at these meetings. So feel free to head out if you need to. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the update on the school presentations on active transportation. John, I'm wondering if you have a bit of an update for us here. It's okay if not much has happened, but just curious to know where we stand on that.
So thanks, Keaton. So I did at the end of last school year, I was planning on kind of seeing if we could fit into some parent council groups to see if we could go in there. And given the challenges that teachers had over the end of that year, I kind of thought, you know what, I think it's not really appropriate for me to add anything on their plate at this point. So I didn't do anything at the end of last year. I've got 2 schools sort of set up now to start in the fall. So I've got, I'm not sure if I can get in on their first meeting. Usually their first parent council meeting is kind of setting rules and everything else. So there's a chance I can get in on one in September, but more likely in October. So I'll probably have more to back then. And then I've got one in that. So those are 2 in the Catholic board, and I've got one in the public board that I'm thinking was going to work out. So we'll see how those ones go. If anyone wants to send me other ones that they have, either vice principals or councils or schools or whatever it is, I'm happy to reach out to them. But yeah, we're still sort of starting through here. Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you. I see Anne-Marie's hand. Go ahead.
John, just an offering. I'll be reaching out this week to all principals and schools in Ward 3 to connect in. So if there's anything you want me to add into that segue to you, I'm happy to do that, or any context, or if you want me to identify an opportunity to connect with you in some way specific to kind of that topic, that would be great. Mine's more of a relationship, stakeholder engagement around principals and school needs.
Sure.
But if that creates an opportunity to kind of mention you and or connecting, I can give you a list of my schools and let you know who I'm connecting with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I guess if you want to present it as kind of a active transportation education and encouragement pilot project, if they want to contact me about that, I can send them an email saying, here's kind of what here's what we're thinking it's going to be, because I want to, I'm hoping that to make sure we're not trying to tell them there's not a lot of work for them. I'm hoping that it's not going to be a lot of work for them. So I don't want them to think that it's, something that they've got to develop. I'm hoping it's something that we can give them a lot of tools for, and they can run with if they just have one teacher that's keen on it. So I guess I would present it as a pilot project for encouragement and education. If they want that, I'm happy to come in and talk to their parent council group, or if they've got some other method they want me to run through, I'm happy to do that too.
Great. I'll offer it and I'll let you know what I get.
Perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Any questions or comments on that from committee members? Amber?
Sorry, just a follow up. Knowing that Sherry was pulled away, but that the health unit through Sherry was doing a lot of work. John, are you still connecting with Sherry, or do we need to loop back with the health unit at all on this project? Is there any gaps because we're missing Sherry over the last little bit?
Good question. Yeah. So maybe maybe I'll see if I can see if she's got a minute to kind of go over this stuff to make sure. I'm definitely using the information packages that they developed. So that's part of it. So, but I will check in with Sherry if she's got a couple minutes to check in. So that's a good point. I'll deal with that.
Awesome. I was trying to keep her updated on the side, but I'm not sure where things are at now as we've changed things with the mass immunization clinics, if her capacity is changing or what that looks like, but it might be an opportune time to re-engage Sherry. Right.
Great. Okay. Good idea.
Okay, fantastic. Not seeing any other hands on that. Thanks for that update. Okay, the next item is around the Singletree bylaw update. So I think Anne-Marie, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Do you want me to speak to that, Keenan, or did you want to jump in? I asked Brandy to leave it on so we could give context.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I appreciate it.
So just because this landed on our committee months and months back through Councillor Claire Rietma, there was good conversation. And I know, Andy, it's your first meeting, but I think you were aware of what Councillor Rietma was doing around the Singletree bylaw, and I'll let you speak to any context you want to give too. So don't hesitate to jump in between yourself and Eric. So Claire had shared a while ago about an intention to kind of look at a potential bylaw for the city to consider adopting. That hadn't met or made its way to a council committee. So I kept it on the agenda because should this committee not be aware, Councillor Jim Harris had raised it because of an issue in his ward regarding a mature tree and some issues when it touched development. So I wanted to let everyone know my understanding is city staff are bringing back recommendations on a potential tree bylaw, private tree bylaw, at a planning committee meeting this month. So I have it in my calendar as either landing on, I think September 21st would be the first planning committee meeting that we'd have. So I'm watching for it to see if it gets raised on that agenda through the planning and development department. But I thought when it does get raised, we probably want to have a conversation and see if that covers the scope that we care about as Active Transportation Sustainability Committee. We had talked a bit about tree canopies. And again, this one really does touch on, I believe, mature trees and ways in which we can ensure there are some protocols and standards in place to protect a tree through development. And also then, especially bordering trees have been raised several times. I know Committee of Adjustment has raised some situations where larger developments or scope of developments have been asked for a tree impact study. I'm not clear on what that means. So I think good conversation to come. I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of where that was tracking. And I think Eric's hand's up there, I'm seeing.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, just as this issue comes up and in relation to recent news stories about tree issues, I want to make sure that we're very careful not to implement something whereby trees are used as a tool for people who simply don't like a nearby development happening and use the tree as a scapegoat. I can see people, in the news have been complaining about damage to roots and mature trees when an extra building is put in. And certainly I can see that being a valid concern, but I also wonder if it's more, the real concern is they don't like the building that the neighbor is putting in, and they're using the tree as a kind of a scapegoat to try and prevent that. Because I just wonder if they had decided to put in their own shed or separate garage or in-ground pool and decided to remove the tree themselves, they certainly wouldn't be happy. Someone said, oh, you can't remove that mature tree to put in your pool or your garage. But at the same time, they're going to say, hey, you can't hurt this mature tree to put in the building that's going to be taller than my fence. So I think we need to just be careful, because if we implement something where environment's being used as an excuse to stop something people don't like, whereas they don't have perhaps a sincere wish to protect trees, we need to sort of keep that in the back of our minds as we look at a tree bylaw that really is looking in a fair way at, obviously we do need to protect our canopy and mature trees, but doing it in a way that it isn't just triggered as a way around something that you can't protest due to it not having needed a public meeting or a zoning change or a committee of adjustment or something like that.
Thanks for that, Eric. It's an important consideration for sure. Andy, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I reached out to Councillor Harris before the meeting, and I had asked him if there's any chance to adjust the wording on the motion. Long story short, no was the answer. But what I was looking at, and I don't know if it's because the motion's already been passed, and Kevin, I would look to you to maybe comment on this. One of the issues I'd had with the wording on the motion was that it was to conduct a cost benefit analysis associated with individual trees. To me, cost benefit analysis is really limited in the scope of what you're going to really get a good tree bylaw in place. You should be looking at a review of other municipalities and what their bylaws are doing, what the scope is. I mean, because that's the best thing about these things is they could be anything. There's no hard and fast, it has to be done this way. It has to be, generate this much revenue or be revenue neutral or any of these things. You can really build it however you want to. And then the other part that's missing in a cost benefit analysis is stakeholder and community consultation, if that's something that could be considered in even the scoping of what it could be. And why I pointed that out is because in Huronia 2 months ago, they had a private tree, single tree bylaw proposed, and it was shot down because at a very early process, because of a fairly small vocal minority. And so again, I feel like this is a very important thing for the city of Barrie. And I just want to make sure that it's done a little bit more thoroughly. And I just wanted to put that comment out there. Now I know the motion has already been passed. Just finally on that motion, the wording of it, the other suggestion I had for it was to remove the future damage of privately owned trees due to private construction and excavation projects, and just take out private construction and excavation projects, just say injuries to trees, like just simply injuries to trees, because right now you might not be doing a construction process, but if you decide you want to take down the tree because you don't like walnuts, you know, then you can take down a tree. Like maybe someone just doesn't like the tree or whatever it is. Like to me, it's about the injuring of the tree. And I'm a little, as Eric sort of alluded to, nervous about tying this to the second suite issue. And, you know, that it's in some ways, this is a way more important and a bigger issue. I mean, I think the second suite is what gave it the political push to get it going. But I do have a worry that it's a little bit narrowing something that should actually be broad at this point. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks for that, Andy. Emery, did you have thoughts on that?
So looking at the current state of where we're at, Andy, in the recommendations you have about ideally, you know, what comes back and that, I'm not sure how we can influence it, but we have city building at the end of the month on the 21st of September. So is there any commentary we would approve or want to move to city building as a recommendation to say, whenever that bylaw comes into play, however it's currently scoped, what we are hoping might move through city building would be a recommendation to council that then when that comes back through staff, asking staff or making sure that that recommendation has included a look at other bylaws and is broadened to also include stakeholder and community consultation, and that the intention of the bylaw actually is broader and not just limited to private construction processes. So city building might be able to then at least, I'm not sure, track back to council to say, regardless of how it's currently framed and has moved through council and comes back, when we're then in deliberations before we approve or consider approving a bylaw recommendation that comes back, would it be timely for this committee to identify an interest to make sure that the bylaw is comprehensive in scope? So is not limited to protecting trees only through a private construction or development process, that the bylaw has some public consultation, and that the bylaw before put in place is looked at in consideration of other effective bylaws. I think Oakville is a big one. Niagara is another one I'm hearing about. So I thought I would just, I'm not sure if it's helpful, but is that an opportunity for this committee to make a statement through to city building that encourages all of council to look at the bylaw more broadly?
Okay, so I think timing wise, it'll have to
So
kind
it can be captured in our minutes, right? If we make a comment, and then we can maybe highlight that at city building around the conversation that we had. Would that work in timing?
Mm-hmm. And I think it would be up to you and I to kind of make sure that happens at planning committee if that's where it's coming. I did see Kevin just pop up on the screen, so I'm not sure if Kevin, you had anything to add at this point.
Is that my hand up version? I popped it on the screen. Yeah, I was trying to think myself too how it's going to work, because I thought it was going to come back through this committee because it was part of the discussions that we had 2 months ago, I think. I'm kind of expecting it to go through city building committee that way, but be interesting how we would tackle that process. I haven't heard yet from the planning department yet who's going to take the lead on bringing it to the planning committee. Typically that's their committee to report to. So, but just as a context, I will say that there is probably a unique version of bylaw for every single municipality who has one when it comes to single tree bylaws. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry at the time when they were called that created templates for municipalities with a big committee. But it seems like everybody kind of went off on their own direction with them. So you will get a really wide range of possibilities, everything from every single tree or every single species of tree, sizes, numbers. Some municipalities allow removal of up to 3 trees before a permit. Some require every single one, and every variation and combination thereof you can get. But I don't know of any municipality that has not gone through a public consultation process to try to develop one.
Okay.
Typically that's part of the process, because you are going to get a large group of interests in it, and different opinions. So I know a couple of major municipalities that tried to do them and came back after their public consultation process and backed out and changed it to something slightly different. So I can't really give much of an update from my end as to what's going on ours, but it's sort of where we're at in terms of context.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. And I think there is an opportunity, as Anne-Marie said, to kind of make this committee's standpoint known to council through city building. So just to be clear, Anne-Marie, you had mentioned an evaluation of best practices from other municipalities, and the potential for a more comprehensive approach to mature tree protection, as well as public and stakeholder consultation. Was there anything else we were missing from that conversation? Andy, did you?
I know Eric's hand's up too. I'm wondering if they've got anything.
Andy, do you want to?
I think Eric was next.
Okay. Oh,
Sorry,
his
that
hands-
was my
it was
hand was left
leftover.
Okay. So yeah, so the other thing just with the way the motion was is that it was very clearly tied to construction and excavation. That's what I would say, like if we could remove that, because that's tying it to a very clear thing, tethering it there, and I don't think we need to. And then just finally, the reason my hand's up is just to put the offer out to Kevin. I know that a lot of these kind of things end up getting piled onto your workload without anything coming off. But I will put the offer of help from myself and Jerry Poisson with Beacon Environmental. We both would like to volunteer to help with just the background information. And Jerry has a unique perspective on it. We've both been tree bylaw nerds for years trying to push this through. But he works as a consultant who deals with numerous municipalities and their bylaws from a practical perspective. So he has some really good input on the ones that work and the ones that really don't work. So just as an offer.
And I don't want in any way complicate the motion underway, but I know we talked a bit about, the intention of a tree bylaw and the scoping, and I would agree that the framing is more restrictive than what we had discussed as a committee, and it came through a different artery, right? So, which is absolutely fine, but would it be important to get on the city building agenda and proactively present on a recommendations while we're considering a bylaw? So that's in the public record. That might be an avenue to educate members of council and staff about what could be considered as this is something that's being looked at.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I don't think like whatever report is coming back to planning committee, it's not going to be the actual tree protection bylaw. It's going to be a recommendation on next steps, right? So this is the time to make our position clear. And I think if we pass a motion to this committee and it was on the city building agenda, then we could have Andy come and speak to the concerns you raised. That would be helpful for us, I think. So I do have a motion that I kind of typed up here. I don't know if Anne-Marie, you had something, or if you want me to read this one out and see.
I was going to be pretty generic so we could speak to specifics at city building. So I was just going to motion that Active Transportation Sustainability Committee recommends that Living Green and Beacon be invited to city building to present on recommendations regarding best considerations as we are looking at a tree bylaw. Is that generic enough?
Can we change the wording and take Beacon off and put Jerry Poisson on? Because he wouldn't be it wouldn't be his company. It would be him as somebody who happens to know quite a bit about it. Great.
Does that work? And then it's in no way we're parceling out a current motion that's already there, but we're acknowledging that this is work underway and it's an opportune time to hear a bit about good practices that have been recognized in other areas, be it bylaws that would be recommended to be looked at, a note about stakeholder engagement and the importance of that, but then also why, if the current motion is framed to be restrictive to excavation and development, why it would be important for the city to consider opening that up to be mindful of other situational factors that could impact a mature tree.
So with this approach, I think process-wise, we wouldn't be having Living Green and Jerry presenting at the next city building, right? I think Wendy might raise a concern with that. If our motion hasn't passed through city building, general, and city council, I worry that we won't be able to get Living Green in to present until October, and potentially that might be too late. We will have received the report on the tree bylaw and a decision may have been made to not proceed at all. So
do we want to just put something on record as a committee, and then maybe offline, Keenan, we can talk about setting the agenda for city building?
I think that's probably a good idea to make that known, to put it out there, even if it's not finally approved. But so I had written that the Active Transportation Sustainability Advisory Committee recommends that the Singletree bylaw investigation include an evaluation of best practices from other municipalities, the potential for a more comprehensive approach to mature tree protection beyond excavation and construction, and a public and stakeholder consultation process. Are we happy with that? And that way we're just letting it known that we have these concerns and we'd like council to consider that. Okay.
Okay. So I'll connect with Claire as chair of city building and just identify that that was a topic of conversation and see where it fits.
Perfect. Anne-Marie, did you want to move that motion?
I'm happy to move that unless Andy, you would like to move that as a member of this committee. I'll move it.
Okay. Any more discussion or questions on the motion before I call the question? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor?
Aye.
All right, and those opposed? None. That carries unanimously. And Brandy, I can send you that exact wording after the meeting. Okay. Let's move on. Sorry, just pulling up my agenda here. Sunnydale Road overpass. So there was some discussion in the summer around the MTO's project for the Sunnydale Road overpass, and there were some questions raised by John and Kelly around what sort of AT infrastructure is going there and if there's potential to change course on this. So Brett, I'm not sure if Brett, if you have some more information for us based on, I think you saw the questions that the committee was working on. So I'm not sure if you have an update for us on where we're at with that.
Yeah. So MTO was provided design criteria based off the in effect Transportation Master Plan, which was the 2013 Multimodal Active Transportation Master Plan. So that identified Sunnydale Road for bike lanes, 1.5 meter bike lanes. So what the plan was at that time was to paint that out again, shoulder space, as there was no plan to have connecting infrastructure in place. But subsequent to that, as part of the 60% design review, we've asked MTO to implement the cycling lanes within their project limits, which start south of Letitia and north of Wellington Street. So they'll be in place. Also, there is going to be a sidewalk on the north side to replace the existing. So going from the existing narrower sidewalk, I don't have the exact dimension, but to a full-size 2-meter extra large sidewalk on the north side, and put provisioning in place to construct a future sidewalk on the south side of the road. The decision was made at that time by staff that there wasn't any upstream sidewalks, and then downstream towards Wellington Street, there were significant constructability issues with retaining walls that just made this project costly from a sidewalk infill perspective, and the need wasn't that great. The one challenge with that approach, just providing all the information to the committee, is that the sidewalk is integral with the abutment. So the opportunity to put the sidewalk in place in the future would require replacing the parapet wall, which is the railing on the side of the bridge. So unfortunately, it's not as easy as just doweling in a concrete sidewalk on top of the asphalt surface that will be put in place. And I can just share my screen quickly just to give you a, let's see if I'm doing this correctly. There we go. So the sidewalk that will be replaced would be on the north side, and then on the south side, this would just be asphalt to the parapet wall, as the current direction is to the MTO. We'd have 1.5 meter bike lanes on either side. Some of the questions committee had was about best practices. Just as Dave McLaughlin noted, just the evolution has been quite progressive and quite rapid over the past 10 years. We would be looking for a more separated facility if we were starting from scratch at this point. We would look to, at minimum, move to a buffered bike lane of 2 meters, and then allow us to consider potential physical separation as well. Now, this project is at the 60% design stage with the MTO. I did note in the conversation that we could ask the MTO what the implications to the project and cost would be to the city, because this is a city cost to consider a design change at this point. That is something I think would be reasonable. I'm not quite sure what MTO's response will be, but I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the question. And just again, for clarification, that just with these projects, as I mentioned in the past, the kind of conception to completion typically can take 8 years. So at some point, the design criteria is locked in. And unfortunately, standards continue to evolve. So that's a common element with any city project, regardless of infrastructure type, is that at some point it's just locked in and then we move forward. And then as part of a next effort, we look to move to the current standard. But everyone recognizes that with bridges, it's challenging. They have a design life of 75 years. So there's that opposing kind of a set of constraints. So definitely recognize the challenges with that. So that's the background on the Sunnydale Road bridge.
That's great. I appreciate that. I see John's hand. I do have a motion too that looks at doing what Brett just talked about, which is going to the MTO, consulting with them about the cost implications of upgrading the infrastructure. So John, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to be, sorry, just to be clear. So our ask is to get rid of the bike lanes, but extend the raised section. So we're going to have 5 meter wide multi-use trail. Like, sorry, can you pull that one back up again, Brett? Is that the idea that it's going to go to from, I guess, 3.5 meter multi-use raised section between there, rather than, like, we're not looking at expanding the bridge deck at all. We're just asking to make the bike lane into a raised section as well. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm clear on, is that kind of what we're looking to get them to do?
The plan for Sunnydale would be unidirectional cycling facilities. So like one way on each side of the road, not necessarily multi-use path. It's a question of whether we need to widen the bridge deck. Obviously, if we don't need to, then there's less impact. But typically for a buffered bike lane, we're looking at 2 meters. So we'd be looking at additional 0.5 per side if we're sticking with our standard approach to our road configuration. I'd prefer not to get into more EA level of work where we're looking at narrowing sidewalks or narrowing travel lanes at this point in the process. That would be my advice on this. So it's not 100% if it needs to be widened, but just it's high probability that the bridge deck would need to be widened to just accommodate moving the 1.5 out to 2 to provide that buffer. And then the question is, what does that space look like? Is that in the interim, like the next 5 or 10 years, is that a painted buffer? Obviously, if we're moving to any higher end infrastructure, we need to consult with operations to make sure we can maintain it. We got to be cognizant of MTO's preference too. If there's something that's could impact the waterproofing, that may impact the concrete structure, we need to be cognizant of making sure we're protecting the structure. So we just, there are some elements to sort out, but that's what we'd be looking at.
Okay.
Is that it for your questions, John?
Sorry, yeah, I guess so. Like, should we be asking them? I guess we if we present them with what we're looking for is to provide either separation with a buffer, or to provide it through a raised infrastructure, and leave it to them to suggest what's the easiest, or if there's an opportunity for them to make that. Is that kind of what we're thinking? We're gonna explain to them what we're looking for, and then ask for them to implement whatever they can from that perspective. Because maybe yeah, we're kind of making, like, I don't know what to ask, if it's easier for them to make that, to shift it to the other side, or if it's, we've probably gone through this process to see what's the easiest approach for them to take.
So my approach is, I want to gather information from MTO on this, what's possible as far as flexibility in the design and schedule to allow this, and get a rough sense of cost just from a bridge square meter deck space. And then I want to come back with a staff report with some cost implications. And as part of that, I'd look to having a consultant make a recommendation just on the cycling infrastructure, just to make sure we're somewhat reflective of the transportation master plan, but not start stepping too far out of kind of what we've established as far as the plan. So I would put that together in kind of a comprehensive package back to council for them to make the decision on this.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah, thanks.
So I do have a motion, so I'll read it out, that staff and development services and infrastructure consult with the MTO Sunnydale Road project team to determine the project and cost implications of upgrading the proposed active transportation infrastructure to include sidewalks on both sides, as well as separated cycling facilities, and report back to the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee. Anyone willing to put that on the floor for discussion? Kelly? Okay, thank you. So it's on the floor. Any discussion or questions on that piece?
I have a question, Keenan, or a comment. I'm wondering if we want to be careful about limiting the language, because what John was talking about, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to get all this jargon correct, but I think like a multi-use pathway or cycle track. I don't want to limit, I don't want to go back to MTO and say, well, we want a buffered lane and we want this, we want that. I think, to have the option of them to say, hey, look, this is what we really want to have, a separated space, whether it's a multi-use path or a cycle track, whatever makes sense within the existing lanes that they've already got. I don't want to, raise a whole bunch of questions around expanding the deck of the bridge, which is going to be gazillion dollars. Like it's going to be an impact. So I want to be clear that, and I know, Brett, with your expertise as well, how we really clarify this with MTO and say, look, this is our goal, right? We want to have safety. We want to be really good with our active transportation. We really need one bridge over the 400. That gets us across safely, and that's what we want to do. And I don't want to trigger anything that's going to say, well, we're going to have to expand the deck, and it's going to cost this. So I just want to be clearer on the language. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, so based on the language I just read, Brett, do you feel confident that you kind of have the leeway to go to them and talk about what our intention is? The wording separated cycling facilities right now and determining the project and cost implications. So it's fairly broad right now.
Yeah, I think there's enough flexibility there. Obviously, our first choice would be look at options that would fit within the bridge deck, but again, we're still at 60% design, so let's see what that looks like. And again, we'll be leaning on a consultant to provide advice. It won't be the MTO telling us what type of cycling infrastructure. We'll be retaining someone to provide that kind of advice to the city, and we'll be presenting what we like. So it'll be a bit of an iterative process, but it's not an overwhelming exercise to undertake. It's fairly straightforward, but they'll be looking direction from us to determine what exactly we want as the city, and they'll determine if they can accommodate it. So that would be an approach. So I don't have an issue with the motion. And as I noted, the one element that might have to change is just report back to general committee if I'm going to do a staff report. But the staff report would detail kind of that conversation, the analysis that was undertaken to result in kind of a recommendation and any relevant alternatives for council to consider as well. So we'll look at a couple different options and we'll have costing, and that'll be laid out in a staff report. So we want to look at the lowest cost option for sure. But again, balancing kind of the long-term nature of this roadway and looking forward based on direction from the committee, considering the new OTM regulations again. So a bit of a change, but that's totally the prerogative of the committee, and we can absolutely look at that. So that's no issue.
Does that help, Kelly? Okay. Okay, so that is on the floor as I read it. Brandy, I saw you pop up earlier. Or is everything good? Was there an issue at all?
No, actually, I just wanted to inquire as to what Brett was referring to about if there's a staff report, if it should actually just be report back to general committee. But that was answered.
Yeah, so the motion that's on the floor right now is reporting back to this committee. Do we, I mean, I feel like it would be nice for us to be able to look at it before it goes to general committee, but I'm not sure how the committee feels about that. John.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great if we do it, but how does it work for the timelines, Brett? Like, are we, like, the earlier we get this, then the better it works.
That's the concern. I don't know, but I'm sure it's as soon as possible. And I'm just worried that if we're tied by another 4 weeks to get to this and then another 4 weeks to get to council, that's really going to potentially create issues. So that was my concern about that. So it was a question I was communicating with Brandy about the best approach, but my gut feeling would be taking this back to general committee just because of timing. Okay. If conversations change, I'll consult with the clerk's office. If we discover there's a large window of timing, I don't think there'd be anything stopping myself from reporting back to the Active Transportation Committee ahead of the staff report.
Okay, so let's change that wording to general committee, if that's okay with Kelly, you as the mover. And then, I mean, at the very least, we can circulate that staff report to committee members in advance of the general committee meeting, and then Anne-Marie and I can bring those concerns to general committee.
Perfect. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
And just for clarification with the committee, right now our current master plan calls for buffered bicycling lanes on that. So that would be the 2-meter bicycling lanes. Is there a specific expectation from the committee that they're looking for? Again, jumping to kind of a cycle track solution. I'm just not sure where that would land based on a technical recommendation from a consultant. So I just wanted to just put that on out there for committee to consider, that the current recommendation is a 2-meter bicycling lane. So the previous recommendation was a 1.5 bicycling lane. Sorry, I'm not helping with the jargon. The current master plan is recommending a buffered bicycling lane. So it's 1.5 plus that 0.5. We still have the option in the future, pending discussions with MTO, to look at physical separation, whether that's flexible bollards or concrete curbing with flexible bollards, pending kind of discussions with, again, both MTO structures as well as operations, if that's something feasible. But I'm just not quite sure how the technical analysis will land on as far as any kind of higher order recommendation like a cycle track. So that would be something we would look at as part of this exercise, just to see if that's appropriate. But I just wanted to make that clear, that likely the kind of preferred solution at this point, based on the council approved document, is a buffered bicycling lane, but we would look at the other two components and include that analysis in the staff report.
Okay, so you will be looking at that higher order of facility. Okay, So I think that's the intention. That's kind of what we discussed through email when we were talking about drafting that letter, was that separated facility and what that would, we're curious what it would take, because it's safer. Okay, anything else on that piece? Not seeing anything. Okay, so I will call the question. Those in favor? Eric?
Aye.
And opposed? Andy too, sorry, Andy, I missed you there. And none are opposed, so that carries. Thank you. Okay, so the next item is cycling and pedestrian safety on Huronia Road. I'm having trouble remembering right now who requested this be put on the agenda.
It was Eric Van Wiesenbeck.
Okay, so let's move that to our, is Eric's still on our committee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We didn't lose him too, right?
No, he isn't. No, I still see him around. I saw him biking around the other day, so he should be still.
Just felt like we were losing members there for a while. Okay. Okay, so we'll push that to our October meeting. If that's all right with the committee. Yeah. Okay. Use of QR codes for active transportation signage. Anne-Marie, was that you that requested this item?
Yes, and so it might be the beginning of a conversation, but I met at Crompton Lane around sharing the initiative, what we're thinking about there with the Barrie Public Arts Committee. So I met with 3 of those members, and there was a lot of great conversation about how we're doing some beautification initiatives across the city, and how do we actually leverage those codes on the city website around areas to invite people to come and visit. And so we had that conversation about active transportation and different routes, and navigating the city to different destination spots. And so the question was raised about QR codes, and I tabled it here because we've had conversation about how to leverage through our work plan, our website level, and how we looked at potentially inviting individuals to identify or pick up different routes. So I was wondering if Brett, sorry to put you on the spot here, or others, if this lands in communications or in general, when we talk about education, that's tied to some of the other work that you and Dave are doing, but also when we talk a bit about routes and active transportation areas that we want to promote. And I'm starting to see QR codes used on things like the Barrie Downtown Business Association and City of Barrie block signage about, the different tours and sites. Are we able to leverage QR codes and incorporate that into our communication strategy in general? And I was wondering where that falls within our work and our website level.
I'm going to take an initial stab at this, but it's multi-departmental for sure. I did have a conversation with Dave about this, just regarding the cycling network. It's something we could look at as part of signage at trailheads, for example, at the waterfront or an entrance to Art Up Bluffs to provide that wayfinding. But as far as kind of the broader network, and I don't think this was a question asked, but we did look at that. It's just not great from a safety perspective to have folks kind of slow down or stop on the roadway to do a QR code scan. But I don't think that was a question asked, but we did discuss that. But I know Wendy's doing a lot of great work with signage around the waterfront, and obviously there's crossover with communications, IT. So I'm not sure what the best path forward is, but I think Wendy's group is probably the most active in signage right now. I know our project will provide, we definitely want to move the wayfinding signage forward, but that might be an element for follow-on work we look at as part of the TMP or another capital project. So maybe I'll pass it over to Wendy, and apologize, Wendy, for putting you on the spot, but maybe you have something,
hi, Wendy.
some input.
Yeah, we are exploring incorporating. It's not actually called a QR code. It's called something else. It's something like the QR code. They just have a different name for it. We haven't actually done it yet. We're hoping to pilot it this fall, so we can have some more feedback on that process. I would agree that it's something that you need to really come up to and be able to stand and scan safely. So I'm not sure if you're thinking about a car drive-by application, but any sort of bicycle application where people can stop, that sounds like a great idea.
So maybe I'll connect with you offline, but I brought it here because I wanted to make sure we weren't going to start into something on a couple of projects that wasn't able to be leveraged through active transportation. So Crompton and Tall Trees, as an example, I took the Arts Committee through, which are walkable spaces. And we are looking at signage improvements or replacements in those areas and love to be using some codes. But before we make an investment in some permanent signage in that, we wanted to make sure that was something that we could leverage or incorporate that was interactive, that also pushed and pulled people to additional information, but was something that could be adopted through active transportation. So we weren't jumping ahead of, I think, where the city was prepared to go, but would love to explore incorporating codes so we could look at how do we minimize overdoing information on signage, but push people to active transportation sites on our website.
Yeah, and I would just offer also that to keep in mind that it would be a conversation with Access Barrie and, of course, where the content would fall on the webpage. So a little bit of Access Barrie and IT.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take it offline with you, Wendy, if that makes sense, noting that it's active or Access Barrie and IT to connect with. But in general, because we talked about where to put it on our website, I'm assuming this aligns nicely to launching or leveraging some of these newer assets around codes through our active transportation site that we've spent some time updating through Brett and others. Is there alignment to kind of locating trails there, or do we need to have a different conversation about where these kind of codes rest or where we push these codes to?
I believe Access Barrie was looking at an overall signage strategy review at some point, so it might be beneficial to just provide them a briefing on the desired ask and have them report to the committee the next meeting with IT as well. Just so they're likely the lead responsible for kind of the core infrastructure, and Wendy and myself and friends would be providing kind of the data that would support that. So.
Perfect, thank you. And don't hesitate to give me an email if you want to direct me to a particular individual at Access Barrie. But I'll try and push that out as soon as possible. That's helpful. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you. Kelly, did I see your hand a second ago?
Thank you. I guess I want to have a little conversation about how we communicate and work with Tourism Barrie, because they have existing QR codes of bike trails and trips in Barrie. And I'm wondering how we work together, and or do we, and what that looks like, because they have existing tours in downtown, and I'm not sure if we're missing a collaboration there, when it comes to active transportation. So I'd like to hear how we can work better together, I guess, with Tourism Barrie, or maybe we already do and I don't know, but I just don't see the links between the two, whether it's our active transportation website versus the Tourism Barrie bike tour signs with their QR codes. So there is existing tours and codes, and I'm wondering if we can work better together.
That's a great point, Kelly. I think it sounds like for our next meeting, we're going to try to have Access Barrie and IT report to us on that signage strategy. And so that might be a good opportunity to invite Tourism Barrie to that conversation and see if there's an opportunity for collaboration. So I'll make a note of that and we can invite all those parties to that discussion. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. Andy, I see your hand.
Depending on where you're at with it, again, this is sort of the first time I'm hearing about it, but TELUS has a community grants that are open. They're open for another week, which isn't a lot of time, but if this is already kind of shovel ready, all ready to go, they're up to $10,000 for connecting up health and community with technology. So this might be a perfect grant opportunity, but it would have to be something that someone could work on right away. And if you want to funnel it through Living Green, that's a possibility as well.
Okay, looks like we got some back channel conversations happening here. Awesome. Okay, anything else on this piece? Not seeing anything. Who would have thought QR codes would make a comeback, eh? No one was using them, and then the pandemic just, wow. Comeback of the century. Okay, one more item. Crompton Park update. Is there anything on this item, Emery?
It kind of ties into the QR code. So we did a tour with the Public Arts Committee, as I mentioned, and some great idea generation for that space. So I'm going to bring those comments back to the small group. I've also met with a couple of local residents. I need to do some more resident engagement, but also got some good initial feedback. In general, yeah, might be an opportunity for the work I think that I'm planning in Tall Trees and Crompton around connecting that in some way to active transportation, to a communication strategy, and to awareness of walkable spaces.
Fantastic. Any questions or comments on that piece? Not seeing anything.
I guess my only other one was, I think we're at a good place for our website, right? We didn't have any next steps tied to the changes we made. We incorporated all the links and information. We've incorporated the icons so that it's kind of a go-ready space we could consider leveraging when Access, Barrie, and IT come back to the table. I'll do some reach out before the next meeting to see who those particular individuals may be, make sure they're aware of the work we've done, and then just see if we can look at an opportunity to really reinforce active transportation website page.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, if committee members haven't already taken a look, I think we were sent the links, and I know I took a look at it. It's great. And I think the city did promote it a bit in June during bike month. So yeah, there's definitely more opportunities to keep pushing that. But if anyone sees anything on the webpage that I think we need to add or change, like, definitely reach out and we can keep working on that. Okay, is that everything on that? Awesome. Look at that. Look at the time. Okay, so I guess we are ready to adjourn the meeting at noon sharp. Amazing timing. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to all the staff who are here today and all the committee members. We really, really appreciate your work.
Welcome, Andy.
Yeah, woo. So nice to have you here. Okay.
Good. Happy short week, everyone.
Yeah, enjoy. Okay, take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Brandy, do you need anything from me? I can send you those motions.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, just to clarify the wording, make sure I have all that